Well, I want to thank the Vicksburg Historical Society for the opportunity to share with you what I understand about the history of weed control, also known as aquatic vegetation control, on Sunset Lake. Uh, Perhaps to improve your understanding of the process, to clear up any misunderstandings, and so we'll have a go at it. This is presented as a contribution to the Historical Society's speaker series today, August 30, 2020, by me, Dr. Ronald Smith. I'm from Vicksburg, but I was basically unaware or didn't really appreciate the issues surrounding weed control in the lake until we moved onto a property in the lake in 2005. And so then I became intimately involved in the whole process. But I've drawn sources, drawn a lot of information from several sources. One is the Vicksburg Historical Society archives. Another, the Sunset Lake Association and Sunset Lake Water Trail files. Another, past presentations that I've given about Sunset Lake history, Sunset Lake ice harvest, and also on village support for the weed control program. I've also drawn from the files of the company that manages our weed control, Professional Lake Management. Also from the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, they have a lot of data. Also from the Kalamazoo County Drain Commissioner's 2013 lake level study. And finally, if I couldn't find anything else, I go out on the web and you can find just about anything you need out there. So let's start at the beginning. And the beginning would be, where did Sunset Lake come from? What's the origin of Sunset Lake? In 1826, there was a Kalamazoo County survey that described the creek's path from Gordon Neck to Barton Lake. It flowed through swamps. There was an 8-foot drop into a gully and then more swamps. Now that 8-foot drop is over there where Vickers Mill was, right there at Clark Park. Because of that drop, it was possible to have a water-powered mill, a grain mill. It coursed over land belonging to the Nottawa Seepe. Now, notice that this is spelled S-E-E-P-E, but I went on the web to learn the proper pronunciation, and it appears that it's actually S-E-P-E-E, and they pronounce it Nottawa Seepe tribe. So just try to get that as accurate as I can. And September 27, 1833, tribal claims to all holdings in the Southwest Michigan Territory were surrendered, including the reservation. Now this shows the survey map, the original survey map with the different sectors of the township, and 13 is mostly where Vicksburg is. Up here is where Gordon Neck is. This is the creek coming through. There's no lake because there's no dam, therefore there's no lake. And then down here is Barton Lake. So you can see the stream came right through to Barton Lake. And this is actually the boundaries of the Nottawa Seepe Reservation. You can see that it comprised basically all of the area that we are familiar with here. Vicksburg is right here. Down here is Mendon. Over here is Fulton. And so you see they surrendered quite a bit of territory when they turned it over to, I guess, to the state. Okay, Vickers Mill. In 1831, Vickers built a brush dam which converted this upland swampland into Sunset Lake and what we know as the Mill Pond. At the time, remember, the Nottawa Seepe didn't sign this over until 1833. Vickers built the dam in 1831, so he was a squatter on tribal land at the time. The dam was powered by two 11-inch millstones. Now imagine those 11-inch millstones be about this size, and they were used for grinding corn in his 14 square foot mill. That was the size of the building initially. It's pretty small operation. But it's extremely important because if you have grains, you really can't use them until you convert them into some sort of a, not powder, what am I looking for, into the flour for cooking. The mill was expanded in 1834 to include a sawmill, a larger grist mill, and this was out of Arl Snyder's book, A Distillery of Which No Good Ever Came, according to some source. The resulting lake defined the character and core of the village, and it became the village's first public park. Vickers Mill was later torn down. Asa Briggs and Daniel Anderson built a new saw and planing mill on the site. Now right here this is the little pond at Clark Park. Up here would be prairie, or what is now prairie. So you can try to visualize this building sitting right there. There is obviously no building there now. But that waterfall is what powered these water-powered enterprises. The planing mill is where they would take rough-cut lumber and smooth them out, for building. It later became known as the Briggs and Smalley and Planing Mill. It was destroyed by fire in 1898, and that was the end of water-powered mills in Vicksburg. Now, just to clear up a little confusion, there's another marker. This is it right here, and that's what is on the marker. Over there by the mill dam, what we know as the mill dam. In 1845, George Stewart and Elias Cooley built a race from the mill pond to Portage Creek. Now you know that race is at the the south end of the mill pond. It's a straight drain, goes under Washington Street and then into the dam, over the dam. That was built there, and they built a flouring mill right there on Washington Street, and they produced what was known as Vickers Superfine Flour. Now this was not Vickers Mill, but they chose that name. And it became known as the Briggs and Cooley Mill in 1850, and later the Briggs and Anderson Flour Mill. And that plaque says that it's Vicksburg's first mill, but that's not true. The first mill was actually the Vickers Mill up at Clark Park. Now, as far as the impact of blocking up the creek, or, I guess you could call it Portage Creek at that time, this is the land before the dam was built, and this is identified as swampland right here, but this is the beginning of the mill pond, and this is the beginning of the lake. And then later, once it was dammed up, here's the mill pond right there, and then over here is the rest of the lake. And these black markers are where the two dams are. There's still a dam over here in Clark Park. If you walk along Prairie and look over the edge, you can see it there. There's a little waterfall, as you know. And then over here is the main one. This is the one that actually controls the level of the lake. And here's a little more on the Lee Paper Dam. This is a photograph from the Historical Society collection of someone fishing downside from the dam. It's part of a larger mill pond project to supply water to the new paper mill. It was blocked at West Grand Trunk Bridge and drained for construction of a gravity-fed system to deliver water to the new paper mill. If you're familiar with the mill pond, there's a structure out there in the water, and water actually went into that and could go to the mill or to their fire suppression system if necessary. Schoolcraft Township constructed a novel cement bridge on Prairie Street. That bridge is still there. That's the bridge that they constructed. Once the mill pond work was completed, a new dam was constructed at the site, and water was let back into the pond in 1905, and that's about the time that the paper mill was completed. The dam failed, just as a heads up, it failed back in June of 1991, and a new dam was built in 1992, and that's something that could always happen. This dam is quite old, and the whole system is quite old. So how and when did Sunset Lake get its name? It was nameless until 1886, mostly referred to as the Swamp, not a very nice name. or the Mill Pond. Sue Moore gave me this history. She says that Jenny Notley, later Jenny Notley Clark, she apparently married into the Clark family, coined the name while canoeing during an April 1886 sunset. And this is what it might have looked like, this image. And one last thing I want to throw in here is about the lotus lilies. Lotus lilies, which are in the, what do we call that over there? It's where the apartments are, what's the name of that? Sunset Cove, that's right, thank you. Sunset Cove. We have audience participation here. Sunset Cove, where those apartments are, that's where these lilies were. And it was a major tourist attraction from the 1870s to the 1920s, sold to passengers when trains stopped in Vicksburg back in the good old days. And the origin and reason for their disappearance is still a mystery, but I'm going to blow this up. Just look at how dense that was. And then over here, you can see the ladies enjoying the view. And notice the attire. We don't dress quite so formally now. And then this is what attracted them, was these lotus lilies. Well, those are all gone. There were some attempts to reestablish them, but everything has failed. All right, Sunset Lake today. It's part of a chain of lakes, the only one that's man-made. It has a 28.3-mile drainage area. This is actually the drainage area that supplies water to the dam, or to the lake. It includes both Sugarloaf and Austin lakes, and also any drainage that comes off the land. And the lake discharges into Barton Lake, not directly, obviously, but through the Mill Creek. There's a 97-acre surface area, and this is an important number because that potentially is the maximum area that would have to be treated to control weeds. We don't treat that much, but it could be quite a bit. And here's an important number to remember. It has a maximum depth of approximately 15 feet. That is extremely shallow. It's the shallowest of the lakes around here. I think Gordon Neck is about 50 feet deep, and I believe Gull is about 130 feet deep at its deepest spot. And that's important because it has to do with the amount of sunlight that can get down there and encourage these plants to grow. And the Mill Dam is a key control point. The lake level is maintained at 6.8 feet on a staff gauge, which is right there on the holding area for the dam. You can go over there and see that gauge. And it's adjusted by using what are called stop logs, which are basically a bunch of 2x6s across there. So that's what holds the lake up, is a bunch of 2x6s. So it sounds a little tenuous, but it's lasted for quite a while. However, invasive weeds are a yearly challenge. Now here's a couple of key areas. One is what we call the channel. This is the entrance to the channel, and this goes way up there coming from Gordon Neck Lake. Another is over here where the former Bobby's Drive-In, and now it's the insurance agency is over there. But just look at this. This is all lily pads and weeds and stuff that could be reclaimed. Well, why do we want to control aquatic weeds? First off, they adversely affect fish, wildlife, hunting, fishing, boating, recreation, irrigation, and drainage. Weeds provide a breeding ground for mosquitoes and give water an unpleasant taste, odor, and color. Environmental impacts. Heavy weed infestations may render an area unsuitable for fish by exhausting dissolved oxygen in the water, blocking sunlight essential for basic food production, restricting the movement of fish, or by rendering shallow water unsuitable for spawning by fish. Recreational impacts. Excessive weed control interferes with the recreational use of lakes and ponds. Access to and use of lakes and ponds for hunting, fishing, wildlife viewing, and nature photography is reduced. Boating, swimming, and other water-oriented activities are hampered, reducing the recreational value of lakeside property and its water resources. And finally, heavy infestations may restrict water flow both upstream and downstream. Impact on property values. Improving water quality through aquatic weed control can restore not only balance to a body of water, but also increase the property values. Someone's interested in buying a piece of property. If they look out there and see a beautiful clear lake, that's going to increase its appeal. What causes weed growth? Well, primary factors are water depth, bottom type, nutrient level, and water clarity. And these factors may vary from one body of water to the next, and they're influenced by the surrounding watershed. The age of the lake can be an influence. As lakes age, they fill with sediment rich in nutrients, such as nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The water becomes shallower and more fertile, favoring weed growth. There's also weather influences. Runoff from heavy rains carries nutrients into the water. Drought may lower water levels, creating shallow areas suitable for heavy weed growth. And finally, sunlight promotes photosynthesis and weed growth, particularly in shallow, clear waters like Sunset Lake. So I always look at it this way: if you want to grow weeds, that's a great place to do it. Human activities, clearing of land for development and farming, causes soil erosion, leading to increased sedimentation. Discharges from sewage treatment plants, livestock feedlots, leaky septic systems also provide sources of nutrients. Hard surfaces, such as roads and parking lots, promote runoff rather than absorption and natural filtration. And finally, waters that would not support heavy weed growth under natural conditions may support heavy weed growth as a result of these human activities. Well, what are the methods used for weed control? One of them that we used a lot in the past is mechanical cutting. It's immediate short-term control, but the cut weeds must be removed to prevent fragments from reestablishing or spreading to other areas. When we did that, our friends at the nursery over here, Prudential Nursery, allowed us to dump, well, I didn't dump, the company did, dump the weeds on a field adjacent to the creek. And there's a belief that they used this for fertilizer. They didn't. It just dried up and essentially disappeared. Another is chemical control. Chemical is currently the most commonly used and most effective and economical method for dealing with aquatic weed infestations. The choice of aquatic herbicide depends on first identifying the weeds of interest and selecting the appropriate product. And that's why there's a variety of products used depending on the kind of weeds. Finally, some areas, particularly in specific spots of lakes or channels, they'll use dredging. Care must be used to minimize impact on fish and wildlife habitats. Now I want to share this with you. I think this is fascinating. Early weed control efforts. You wouldn't think about this, but they have to do with the Sunset Lake ice harvest. There were actually two separate ice harvests. One was the Grand Trunk ice, a railroad harvest, and that is a loading platform, which is right over there on the other side of the pond where Vickers and Family Fair are. That's where that track is. It's on the lake side. And the other one, you can see in the background this building. And I'll have it closer up, but I'm going to blow it up here for you. These men down here are loading ice for the Grand Trunk Railroad. But out here, this is the Godshock Ice House where they used to store ice for Vicksburg. And that ice would be packed up there in the wintertime and would last into August. So it's amazing how efficient that system was. So the Godshock Ice House, the original Godshock Ice House was built on the Mill Pond in the early 1900s. A larger facility was built on McCain Street, which is a street that my wife and I live on, in 1905. Ice harvest was started in January and lasted just 1 to 2 weeks. It was short-term employment, but it was intense. Mercer Munn, who the Munn Insurance Agency is named after, and he used to be a council president, very prominent individual in the village, took over upon Godshock's death in 1933, and production ceased in the 1940s. And this is a closer-up photograph of that facility. And this up here is John Gottschalk and his wife, Mabel. This is Mercer Munn back in the day, and I have an account that I'm going to play for you. I have the transcription also, but I think to listen to his account is quite entertaining. So I think the speaker will, the microphone, I'm sorry, will pick that up. But he was the last owner operator of the Gottschalk Ice House, corner of McCain and Page Street. Page Street is a street that runs right in front of Sunset Lake Park. He describes the procedures in the fall to rid ice harvest areas of weeds, and he documents that weeds have been a problem on the lake since the early 1900s. So this is the closer up of the building. This was a harvest area, and they would shuttle the ice blocks over here in the water, float them over, and then they go up this conveyor. And this was a very dangerous job because each block of ice weighed about 200 pounds, and they would have 10 at a time. They would convey. And these horses may have been, although they did use horsepower, I'm not sure if that's what they're doing, because they used horses out on the lake too. It was a horse-powered conveyor system. Now later they used gasoline engine, but initially horse-powered. So if for any reason the horse changed its mind, you got somebody at the end of those blocks kind of guiding things, potentially a tremendous risk. So this was a very dangerous business. This is the transcription, and I'm not going to read it. What I think I'm going to do is play it for you, and we'll see how this works. Okay, I think the speaker's set. Here we go.
Well, about the first thing we would do is about the 1st of October, is to clear the area where we were going to harvest ice of all the weeds. If you go and look at the Sunset Lake now along in the fall, you would wonder how in the world you'd ever put up any ice there because it's practically solid with weeds. And I remember Clarence Heber, some of you might remember him, and myself going over and clearing the area where we were going to harvest ice of all of the weeds, so that the ice would be clean, fit to use, put in lemonade, and all that sort of thing, and everybody done it. And there wasn't any fish there either. But it was a real job, and I can remember Clarence hating that job so, and I did too. And we would go over there in October. We get a boat, and we had a large spool of wire, number 9 wire. We would pass one end of the wire to a tree, a big oak tree. I think the tree is still there, out in front of Red Moore's house, a little bit south of it. We put this spool in the boat. One would roll, and the other would unwind the spool, and we'd make a nice swoop out in the lake. Then we'd hook the other end on to a truck and drive the truck down, I don't know what street that is, McCain Street, I guess. And of course the wire, being way out around, would cut the weeds off and drag them all up to shore. And we worked and worked and worked onto that until we had an area large enough so we thought we could get several hundred tons of ice out of there. That was the next thing that we done. We had a lot of fun doing it too. I remember many of the experiences we had. Sometimes we'd almost tip over in the boat. Sometimes we'd get the weeds almost to shore and the wire would break. Then we'd have to pull it all the way back and hook it together again and start over again. Real trying time, but a lot of fun just the same.
Okay, I hope you can decipher that. A couple of things of interest. First, as I mentioned, was Mercer talks about the weed control being a big problem back then, late 1800s, early 1900s. The other is he was, and I've heard several other presentations by him, he always liked to say, but it was always a lot of fun. And I think that's a good attitude to have, because that was very trying, very challenging work, but he always put a pleasant spin on it. And that presentation, I believe, was to the Vicksburg Historical Society. It was one of their programs. All right, and just one last thing about ice. It wasn't just a local thing. The Grand Trunk ice was hauled to Chicago for the packing plants, but I thought you might find this interesting, this promotional thing. Help in the harvest. Ice is needed to save food for the starving people of the world. So this was a noble venture. And we actually have an ice box like this over at the farmhouse. Kids don't even know that there is such a thing. They don't know there's a world before refrigerators, but that's where the ice would go. Okay, let's talk now about the actual harvesting and chemical control. Weed control beginning. Sunset Lake Improvement Association was formed in the mid-'70s to study and act to reduce weeds in Sunset Lake. The Sunset Lake Association was formed in 1987 to support lake cleanup through voluntary dues collection. The Village Council created a Sunset Lake Improvement Board in 1994, which facilitated outside funding. The Sunset Lake Association, as I said, was established in 1987, but it achieved 501c4 status in 1992. What that meant is it's a tax-exempt organization that collects money for a particular purpose. Joseph Anderson, who recently passed away, Dr. David Schremer, our physician over here at Family Doctors, and Dr. Lloyd Appel, who was a physician there and still very active in the community, were founding co-presidents of the Sunset Lake Association. And they wrote the bylaws and got the 501c4 status and all that. And this enabled us to collect dues for weed control. Otherwise, it's a pretty shady business going around asking people to give you money and you don't have an actual legal organization. Objectives stated in the bylaws were to educate riparian, people who live on lakes, property owners, and other lake users about water quality and safety, promote the welfare of the lake. Oh, there goes my phone. And I'm going to turn that off. Promote the welfare of the lake, including mechanical and chemical weed control, conservation of, excuse me about that, water supply and watershed, maintain water quality conducive to swimming and renewal of fish and bird resources, and finally, support measurement and evaluation of hydrological data to support decision-making regarding lake health. And this was the sort of measurement where we came up with a legal lake level. And another important measurement is once a week, Kalamazoo's Public Health Department comes out and samples the water in several sites off Sunset Lake Park for E. coli. So we know it's actually a very safe lake to swim in. Accomplishments: aquatic vegetation control was initiated in 1993, financed through voluntary dues and yearly contributions from the village. A special assessment district was established in 2010, and these were 5-year districts, and then they have to be renewed. It joins a number of other local lake associations, so we weren't the only one with a special assessment. Austin, Barton, Gordneck, Indian, Long, and Westlake, to name a few, have comparable programs, and they're all managed by the same company, PLM, Professional Lake Management. Among other accomplishments, support recreational use of lake and the aesthetics, and initiated a process to establish a legal lake level, which we have established. I thought you might find this interesting, why we had to go from voluntary dues to a special assessment. Voluntary dues, the most we ever got as far as donations was from half to 2/3 of residents. And the yellow is the village contribution. That's the proportion of the total expense each year for village contribution. The red is for the private sector, the businesses that were like Prudential and the attorney's office that was over there It's an attorney's office again, next to Veterans Park. And these little bars down here is what came from the residents. So you can see that without this additional donation here, we'd be hard pressed. And that still wasn't enough to do everything we needed to do. That was the best we could do. And this was for the 2004-2009 period. Again, this is, if you combine both, all the village contribution together, that's this part of the bars. And this down here is non-governmental, which would be residential and private sector. Again, the non-residential, the dues only covered at most half of the expense. And even then, it wasn't enough to cover everything. So 2004-2009 village contribution was $6,000 to $7,500. 21 to 31 parcels contributed an average of $5,618 per year. At that time, there were 51 parcels on the lake, so you can see we only got a portion of them donating. Average yearly income of $11,868 was only half of what was needed to achieve the recommended level of weed control. So in 2010, Don DeBruin initiated, and I helped out, to create the Special Assessment District, and this was approved at Schoolcraft Township. And so it was initiated by Sunset Lake Association, administered by Schoolcraft Township. Village contribution remained at $6,000 a year, which represented approximately $5 per Vicksburg residence. If you assume the lake is a public park, that's the context in which to interpret that number. Each resident would be donating $5 per year to maintain the lake. Now, a lot of them wouldn't set foot in the lake, but that's just the way parks are. I'm sorry, I said 50, some 49 parcels were taxed at $333.88 each for $16,000 per year. And that was the amount that we needed to treat the lake, not that 10 or 11,000 that we got before. And this was the amount they were charged, irrespective of lot size or lake frontage. So my wife and I pay the same amount at that time, $333, as Prudential Nursery, which has a tremendous frontage. But that's just the way these things are calculated. A yearly income of $22,360 covered all treatment expenses for the year. Weed control contract services. In the past, we relied on a combination of chemical and mechanical treatment for algae and a variety of weeds, and now we use chemical only. This is a weed harvester. It costs several $100s per hour just to rent that thing, and you can see the conveyor and the weeds going up there. The problem is that a lot of the cuttings, excuse me, escape from there. And anything, you can see it out there in the lake. You see the weeds out there? That stuff just propagates itself. So if you want to spread it, that's one way to do it. You get a lot of weeds, but you can also spread a lot of them that way. This is the picture of mechanical treatment. They use an airboat. You may have seen it or heard it out there. There's a tank here, and it draws water from the lake. And so it's similar to a lot of herbicide treatment devices that, or your power wash thing, which draws water from your hose and mixes it in the tank. So the chemicals are in the tank, it draws water into that, mixes them, and then comes shooting out this thing. And so they spray in front of all residences because everybody is charged. And swans out here are just passive observers. It's really very non-invasive. And I've ridden on this thing. It's actually a lot of fun. And you can go just anywhere you want. You don't have to worry about lily pads or anything. So now we're on the third 5-year program, the 2020-2025 program. Estimated 5-year treatment cost from professional lake management is $101,000. It's administered by Schoolcraft Township for an additional cost of $7,500. There's legal fees, permit fees, and all this. There are now 52 parcels on the assessment rule, including 2 village parcels. Those are 2 additional ones. One is Sunset Lake Park, and the other is Veterans Park. And so the village has opted to be charged as another lakefront property rather than just as a donation, and I think that's fine. Some cost savings are carried over from a previous 5-year program. So consequently, the total assessment for a single family residential parcel on the lake for this period will be $1,833 over the 5-year period, or $337 per year, which is actually quite reasonable considering the past expenses. And Lloyd Appel once said, it's really no different than lawn chemicals for treating your lawn. And when you live on a lake, the lake is actually part of your front. It is your front yard. It's your lawn. So that's really what we're doing, is taking care of our yard. Now, I mentioned the treatment schedule. I know you can't read this. I'll blow it up in a moment. Chemical only, 6 treatments with 5 herbicides, algicides from May through August. One of those treatments is actually a sampling, a survey sampling. And these are the chemicals that are used. Copper sulfate, that's for algae. These other ones are more serious for the other weeds. Diquat, dibromide, endothol, I can't read it here, flumioxazin, and adjuvant, which is just something they use to dilute the chemicals. And so I'm going to put it out here, this thing. Well, you can't read it very well, but these are all the different chemicals that could be used. And up here is the withdrawal periods. Don't use for swimming, don't use for irrigate, don't use on your crops, don't use on your lawn. So the point I want to make is this is very strictly controlled by the state of Michigan Department of Environmental Quality, and we have to have permits for everything. We don't get it. Professional lake management gets the permits. So there's nothing being put in the lake that is harmful for humans or fish or wildlife. One thing though is we have to pay attention to the do not use on your lawn notices. And whenever they treat the property, they put a poster, a signage up on trees and things. And you probably may have seen those in the parks. Because you don't want to spray that on your lawn if it's something that will kill your lawn. I've never had that experience, but I would not be very popular at home if I did that. Okay, the treatment area. This is the picture of the Sunset Lake and all the parcels. And you can see how it's all divided up. And this, I told you, Prudential Nursery has a lot of frontage. All of this is Prudential Nursery. And they pay the same amount, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's the way we figure it. That's the way it's done, as all these other parcels. Sunset Lake Park is right here. Let me move this up a little bit. Whoop. Okay, that's better. This is Sunset Lake Park. And Veterans Park, which a lot of people don't even know exists, is a little park right here, right where Prairie crosses the railroad tracks. There are a couple of benches out there. It's a great place to sit and have deep thoughts, unless the rain comes by that kind of distracts you. But you got a nice view of the lake and everything right there. And this down here is Sunset Cove, is the Mill Pond. Then over here, this is the treatment area. And you can see it covers basically all of the shoreline. There's some areas here where they're restricted, where they can't really treat. It's too far offshore, or the weeds aren't enough of a problem. But it goes way up into here. This is Peninsula Drive. And on this map, on this map, it's this area right here. See, there's a lot of parcels right up there. So that's this area right here. Okay, I'll stop messing around with the cursor. What are the target species? I thought you might find this interesting. These are submersed and floating what they call vascular, macrophytic, and ceroid algae flora of Sunset Lake. These are all of the plants that have been identified in Sunset Lake. And I've highlighted in yellow the ones that we really go after. The fanwort, Eurasian, this sounds like the name of a rock and roll growth, fanwort. Eurasian water milfoil, curly-leaf pondweed, and there's one other, which is the algae, which I'll talk about in a moment. This is fanwort, also known as kabamba, which sounds like a song. It's exotic. It's an aquarium plant. If you look at it, it's just like those aquarium plants that you see, and that's what it is. In fact, it may have been introduced by somebody emptying their aquarium in the lake. These are all exotic. They're not native to Sunset Lake. It's spreading in southern Michigan, especially Delton, Vicksburg, Kalamazoo areas, bright green coloration. And these slides actually are from Professional Lake Management. Eurasian water milfoil, totally different looking thing. Public enemy #1 on Michigan lakes, they say. Highly invasive, and if there's a canopy or monoculture, it'll just form a layer right under the water. It spreads from a root system, and so if you get it growing at the bottom, it spreads out through the roots. And fragmentation, so cutting and raking will increase the spread. So anything that gets away will just reestablish itself. It outcompetes native plants, and yeah, that's about it. Here's another curly leaf pondweed. You can see probably why it gets its name. See the curly leaf on there. It overwinters under ice. Typically the first plant present in the spring. There's a natural die-off mid-summer. Small scattered serrated teeth on leaf margins. Lasagna noodle, I don't recommend eating it though, leaf. Reproduction via turions, and I failed to look that up, so some of you may know what that means. I sure don't. And then here's the algae. This is, for me, it's public enemy #1. There's 3 kinds. There's the free-floating algae that you see sometimes. There's the planktonic, which turns the whole lake green. It's like pea soup. And then there's the microalgae, chata and starry stonewort. Now, starry stonewort is a new critter out there. It forms what we describe as a carpet, and it's right on the bottom, but then it grows to be very tall. It's like a carpet, and it outcompetes everything else, and it also destroys fish habitat. The good thing is it's vulnerable to copper sulfate, which is an inexpensive treatment, no withdrawal as far as land agricultural use or swimming, but since it's very low in the water, it's hard to get the copper sulfate down there. So it's going to be a continuous battle. And then there's the local efforts. I thought I'd throw this in. These are local residents who just come to clean up along Sunset Lake Beach. And this is my wife right here and some of the other neighbors. And so you see there's that volunteer effort too. We're just scraping up the stuff that comes off, the dead stuff comes off the lake. Sunset Lake, a year-round public park, and you can see all the sorts of activities. Kayaking is becoming a big deal now. Swimming, not so much. I'll talk about that in a moment. But people still swim there. I see swimmers out there every day. In fact, I go swimming out there periodically. Over here is the ice in the wintertime. I counted as many as 32 ice fishermen out there one day. There's a whole community out there. There's some towns that don't have 32 people in them, so that's a lot of people. This is my grandson here. Just a word about Sunset Lake Park. Is designated for park purposes in 1904 when the Frakes Edition plot was drawn up. Dated to the village in 1912. In the 1950s, the Park and Beach Improvement was the first project of the newly chartered Lions Club, and this is a promotional thing that's from my 1961 Vicksburg High School yearbook, but I have it there not to promote the Lions, but rather Charlie's in the Rotary, an equally equanimous group. just to show you what Sunset Lake Park used to look like, there would be up to 400 people there in those swimming lessons. And there was a raft there with a diving board, 2 docks, concession stand, and everything else. And we had a lifeguard. This is actually a classmate of mine, Norman Brewer, and this is Nancy Barkley. And you see the dock going out there and all that. Improvements included a new beach house, sandy beach, lifeguard, and raft. I'm sorry. Red Cross swimming lessons attracted almost 400 kids, and that's why there's still signs up there that say no parking on the street, because back then everybody parked there, and there's also a sign that says additional parking in Sunset Lake School to direct people over there. Well, now we don't have anything like that, but those signs are still there. And the picnic pavilion was added in 1964. Originally, it had a flat roof, which can be self-destructive. Later, a peak roof, I'm going to call her a peak roof, was built, and that's what's there now. And the village maintains that. And it's a little pavilion, and it gets quite a bit of use. There was a Sunset Lake Park improvement plan it fell within the 1981-1990 10-year period for park plans for the village. And they had all this stuff. Down here is parking. Over here are private lots. Over here is the boardwalk. And that boardwalk is still there. Here's the public beach area. Here they have let me go back. Here they have a fishing pier. Now it's just a little deck out here. And there's another one right over here. But back then they projected this pier going way out there, which would have been perhaps more useful because you get a lot of weeds around here. And another important thing is a boating ramp right here. So if you need to launch your boat, that's a concrete ramp, comes right off Frakes, easy to back into. And that's another reason why we get weeds introduced into Sunset Lake. Some of these lakes don't allow boats to be brought in on trailers. It's only for the residents. But Sunset's wide open. There's no fee, there's nothing. And then here are the walkways. So you can see this was all figured out back 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And finally, one of my contributions, I'm on the Lake Association board, but I read an article some time ago in the Gazette, I think, about water trails. I didn't know what a water trail was, so I read up on it, and I said, why heck, we have a water trail right here in Sunset Lake. And if you look at it, this area right down here, this is the lake proper, and the beach is right there. Okay, this, I keep using the wrong one, I'm sorry. This up here is what we call the channel, but it's actually technically part of the lake. Until you get up to this point where Gordonick Creek's what I call it, comes into the lake. And so up to here is the lake, and then here is Portage Creek. But the thing is, this is continuous all the way from Gordonick Lake. So our water is coming from Gordonick all down through this creek into Sunset Lake and then on down to Barton. So to me, that fits the description of a water trail. And so I created this poster with help. Obviously, Brian Newhoff gave me the excellent satellite imagery. It's all labeled. My daughter, who's a graphic designer, came up with the design and proper text and all that, and I took this photograph, so I guess that was one of my contributions. It's a kayaking club launching off our beach, and our beach is a great place to launch kayaks. And so the Sunset Lake area is, you get different estimates for the size. This says 131 acres. The perimeter of the main lake, which I measured, is 1.5 miles. So if you just kayak around the main lake, that's a 1.5 mile kayak ride. The kayak launch site to Gordonick Creek is 1.5 miles. And if you go Gordonick Creek from the end of the lake up to Gordonick Lake is 3.6 miles. And so you can take a pretty good ride going. Most people put in upstream, that way they're not fighting the current when on the creek. And also fishing, I found listed as largemouth bass, perch, carp, catfish, northern pike, striped bass, bream, bluegill, gar, pumpkin seed, sunfish have all been identified in the lake. People ask me, are there any fish in this lake? And so I have to refer them to this sign. And finally, this is the Facebook link. I have a Facebook page where I periodically update it with scenes from stuff that's going on. Whenever I see some activity that looks interesting, I'll go over and take a photograph and talk to the people and put it up there. So I encourage you to take a look at that. So in the end, let's see if I got this right. Oh, I know. There we go. In conclusion, yearly weed control efforts maintain the health of Sunset Lake, an important part of the local ecosystem and the Vicksburg community. I hope I've convinced you of that. And you're familiar with this signage. You'll notice this is the actual image that this is taken from. This is a brick wall. I don't know where that came from. There is no brick wall. And in the back, it looks like an ocean out there. Actually, there's a railroad track. In fact, the train is going by even as we speak. But there is a nice fountain out there, so that's where that came from. So this is the end, and there's 3 ends, 4 ends actually. So thank you for your interest in this presentation. I hope you found it entertaining and educational. Thank you.